get higher. Put a little bit of shit, put a little bit of shit, put a little bit of shit. I'ma make it burn, I'ma make it burn, I'ma make it burn, I'ma make it burn, I'ma make it burn.
Yes, we are live. 07s for the thumbnail. Let's get some 07s in the chat. Welcome, y'all. You are watching the Barracks, your non-Euclidean network, bringing you news, policy, geopolitical intel from a multipolar world perspective, from a communist perspective, uniting the working class all around the country and increasingly all around the world. As from our corner over in Taiwan to right here in the US of A, we got a very special guest for you today, representing the infrared community, PJ Cornell.
How's it going?
It's going well, my friend. And we also have our number one co-host going live from the secret moon base where the deadly space laser pointed at the polar ice caps, could go off at any second, is your friendly neighborhood Milkman. How you doing, Milk?
I'm doing all right. We cut the intro down to 5 minutes. I was kind of hoping we were going to cut out the part where he says got a little bit of shit, because I'm not really sure what that means. But it is AI generated. We didn't write the lyrics, so don't blame us. I might have just ruined that song. I'm sorry. Today is September 11th, and everyone's talking about it, of course. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And we thought about doing like a red pill stream where we like present the case, but honestly, if you still believe the official narrative of 9/11, I don't really want you in my audience, to be honest. Like, it's 2023. Get your shit together.
Did you, PJ, you want to...
Yeah.
You were going off on Twitter. You want to tell us what you were going off about?
So, I mean, if you're talking specifically about the 9/11 posts, or are you talking more about the Phil Labonte stuff, or?
Well, what I got a bunch of tweets pulled up here of like different takes, because
Sure.
Nobody has a good take. It's like when you get a certain amount of clout, you're just not allowed to speak the truth on this topic, which is, it's strange. And we're going to go through all the different kinds of takes we have. I said official narrative, but the thing about the official narrative is it comes in many shapes and sizes. And people like this very disappointing tweet from Libertarian Party New Hampshire try and sort of trick you that like they're being based when they're really just promoting the official narrative. So I'll read this off. Hashtag never forget that 9/11 was provoked. If you want to know what blowback means, look no further than 9/11. Years of covert and overt. So they're doing the blowback thing. All right, we don't need to read it. It's it was blowback. So you see this a lot. but like that is the official narrative. I mean, they're saying, yeah, it all happened exactly how they said it did, except they didn't hate us for our freedoms. Like, okay, great job, guys. You cleared that bar. But other than that, it's all exactly how they said it is. And I don't know. I feel like these guys must know better. But it seems like as soon as you get tied into any institution, you just can't. This is an untouchable topic. Even 22 years later, I mean, it's so obvious. Just look at the footage of Building 7. Look at the crash at the Pentagon. Look at the crash in Shanksville. Just use your eyes. It's so obvious that the official narrative is bogus. But that's what they're promoting. This is like the most dissident party on Twitter. And they're playing this little game where they're like, oh, we're not just going to say never forget. We're going to say never forget that 9/11 was provoked. But like,
I will say one minor caveat to that. So I was a libertarian until basically, I'm talking like LP voting libertarian, basically until Trump's first term. And then after that, I still consider myself like a small libertarian for a long time, basically until yesterday, damn near. I will say the Mises caucus of the Libertarian Party is the base caucus of the Libertarian Party. I'm not going to say they have everything right. Obviously, they don't. Obviously, they don't read into. They're not read into Hegel. They're not read into Heidegger. They're not read into the thinkers that Haas read into, to where he was able to sort of bring me into the fold and convince me of his point of view. But then Americans in general just are not as familiar as they should be with the continental tradition. But if you're looking for a base, they're going to be part of the Mises group.
all right, good to know. But it's, I mean, you don't need to read anybody to
No, not
this shit. You need to be, right. I mean, out of the matrix, I guess, right?
I mean,
or red pilled, as they say.
If you've just been paying attention, then you know that what that was really about was about $2 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon, which back in the day was a lot of money. I mean, now, we piss away $2 trillion like it's nothing. But back then, $2 trillion was considered to be real money. And, the Pentagon lost it. They were investigating it. And then magically, Building 7, which was not impacted by any building, by any planes, had a small minor fire, just collapsed. And that just happens to be where they were investigating the $2 trillion that were missing from the Pentagon, which, by the way, it came out later. I want to say it was 2017, 2018, somewhere in there, might have been 2016. They discovered that since then it climbed to like $3 trillion, that we just don't know what happened to it. We don't know where it went. And that's what they're investigating in Building 7. And now magically it's gone. How about that?
I want to actually, before we go through the rest of these responses that I've got lined up, I want to just talk about the issue broadly, because like this is a really important issue for me. It's pretty much central to my politics, because I got red pilled about 9/11 very young, before I knew anything about politics or conspiracy theories or anything. It just always seemed fishy. I mean, I remember when I was in first grade, and my teacher came in and started telling us what happened, and I thought it was like a thought experiment or something. I thought, like, there's no way this is real. And I'd love to say I never bought it, but there's no way that's true. I don't remember, but I was a kid. But I definitely, when I was like 12 or 13, I went down like the YouTube rabbit hole of like all the discrepancies in the narrative, and it seems pretty obvious to me, and it brings up two really big questions if you get properly 9/11 pilled, which is, one, what is the nature of a ruling class that would do something like this? Like, how are people doing this to how do these people do this to their own countrymen? And two, why is everyone going along with it? Like, why is nobody else seeing what I see? It seems so obvious. Like, just look at Building 7, which, by the way, I love when people say, like, oh, well, there's no way the government could have pulled it off, because they didn't pull it off. Because the plane that was supposed to hit Building 7 crashed in Shanksville. There was a mutiny by the passengers, and the plane crashed. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but it seems pretty obvious that plane was supposed to hit Building 7, because the other buildings collapsed at like 9 a.m, and then at 5 o'clock, Building 7 just collapses for no reason.
I missed
and
that.
They say it was a fire, but I didn't see any fire. Like, we're just taking their word for it that there was a
I mean,
fire.
it's not funny people died, but at the same time, you can't help but see kind of the irony in that.
Yeah, and it's like, but people, it didn't even matter. People people still bought it. And the shit at the Pentagon was like, people don't really talk. People only ever talk about the North and South Tower because Building 7 and the Pentagon are like, it's so obvious. You just need to look at the images. Look at the images of the crash at the Pentagon that they say was a 757. Well, okay, whatever. We said it wasn't going to be a red pill stream. Anyway, the point is, my political development, these two questions have always been like at the core. This is what led me to communism. This is what led me to all the like esoteric conspiracy stuff. Is that like what? Because obviously my conception of like how the world works is wrong if this can happen and everyone can go along with it. So it's sort of the big litmus test for me. Like if you're just like a grill dad and you don't really pay attention and you just sort of watch football, like that's one thing. But if you're like a political Twitter account or like you fancy yourself a political actor and you're pushing the official 9/11 narrative, I don't care what else you call yourself. I don't care if you call yourself the most hardcore Marxist-Leninist or whatever. You're in the Matrix. You're with the deep state.
Here's what kills me. All right. Here's what kills me the most about that, which is, what do you stand to gain? You trying to get a piece of the mainstream media pie, the dying mainstream media pie? You trying to jump on the Titanic while it's sinking? You have everything to gain by telling the truth and nothing to lose. Well, I mean, other than your life. I mean, really. But what kind of life is that? Really? If you got to wake up every day and you can't look at yourself in the mirror, what kind of life is that? Risk something. Have some balls. Tell the damn truth. There's nothing to lose really at this point by telling the truth. There's nothing to gain by pushing their narrative. They've got nothing to offer you. Look at CNN's ratings. Look at Fox's ratings once they fired Tucker Carlson. That's the ship you want to be on? Tell the goddamn truth.
Well, I still don't really have an answer to that question. I don't understand why people are still pushing it. I mean, dude, I got in some ridiculous arguments on Twitter today. Like one guy was trying to tell me, like, well, if it was a false flag, why didn't they blame Saddam? Like, what?
They tried to blame Saddam. I remember. I was there.
Blame Saddam. They blamed Saddam until they invaded, and then they were like, "Oh, it wasn't really him," but they already invaded, so who cares?
Right.
But anyway, it's just like, I don't know what these people stand to gain. I really don't understand it. I'm still trying to answer these questions. I'll be honest, but
I mean, does no one remember like the whole the Chappelle's yellow cake routine? They got yellow cake. Oh my God. I'm sorry. I got to make light of it somehow, because if you don't make light of it, you'll cry. But
yeah, it is.
Yeah, I remember that
like,
whole thing with Colin Powell at the UN and everything like that. I mean, I was young. I was like 16 at the time, and so I got sold on it because I didn't know any better. I was just a kid. But yeah, I was like, oh yeah, let's invade Iraq. You know, they've got uranium. They're gonna nuke us and shit like that. So, you know, I didn't know any better. But no, I remember distinctly they were trying to tie Al Qaeda to Saddam Hussein, and anyone who lived through that time, and they're saying anything otherwise, they're just lying, or they've got a terrible memory.
Yeah, a lot of people try and cap like they were against the Iraq War. No, not.
No one was against the Iraq
No
War.
one was against.
Other than
it.
Donald
No one
Trump.
was against it.
Donald Trump was like damn near the only person against the Iraq War, but everyone was for the Iraq War.
Yeah, it was
Everyone
very
was
popular.
everyone was either on board or was duped.
I mean, we were also very young.
Yeah, that's true.
Like there are people, I don't understand how someone could live through that and now know it was lies and like still buy the Ukraine stuff. You know, like my grandfather, for example, is like a big New York Times reader, and he lived through all that shit, like the Judith Miller era, and he's still like insane for Ukraine. It's like, it's like Charlie Brown with the football.
Well, yeah, at some point, the idea that our government is that corrupt and that evil is just not something they're prepared to deal with. And there's just nothing.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Because I know that's the case with my dad. I love my dad. My dad's a great guy. But and actually he got a little bit red pilled by January 6th, a little bit, but still he has a lot of trouble coming to terms with the idea that there's a Molech worshiping cabal running the world in this country. You can't process that. And I feel like that's a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it is a lot. Just like people can't handle the truth, so they just shut it out.
Right.
Well, anyway, we could look at a few more. Some of these are pretty egregious. So,
Yeah, let me pull it up on screen again.
yeah, this might not have. Let me know if this doesn't have sound. But we said the Libertarian Party at least cleared the bar. They hate us for our freedoms bar, but not everybody did. Not everybody cleared that bar. Here's fucking Dennis Prager. Oh man, this is gonna piss me off. Let me know if there's sound on this, because
I
sometimes.
saw this clip. This man is a disappointment.
On 9/11, right? The truth is, most of my peers, I was born after 2001.
Oh wait, this isn't it. Oh, this is the wrong one.
Yeah, you're
Okay,
talking
well,
about the one where Dennis Prager is trying to debunk the conspiracy.
we don't need to watch the 5-minute one. He doesn't. He says it's evil to question it, which is like. I actually do want to find it. Wait, give me a sec. We can, we'll talk about this one, and I'll try and find.
I mean, Dennis Prager also uses bar graphs without labeling the X or Y axis.
Oh, PragerU's graphs are next level, dude. PragerU and their graphs. Okay, well we'll talk about this one and then I'll try and pull it because it's worth responding.
The only good thing I can say about PragerU is they were a tiny bit ahead on the woke stuff, tiny bit. Other than that,
That's true.
I mean, what do they contribute really?
I mean, it's so easy to do that. Like, that's all these like YouTube right-wing grifters have ever done for the past like 10 plus years. Is just since the Tea Party was just poke at the culture war, so they don't actually have to pose any solutions.
Right.
Just convincing you that everything's normal, that normal sucks, and you shouldn't do anything about normal. But it's it's nothing out of the ordinary here. It's just your regular out of control inflation, just your regular we're gonna allow pride parades that have grown adults getting naked in front of kids. And, just normal, like, and we're gonna be against that, but 10 years from now that'll be fine. There'll be some new thing that will say, oh, pump the brakes on it, pump the brakes on this new thing. Give us 10 years to get used to that.
Right.
And,
Yeah,
rather than actually lead this country out of the jaws of disaster, just telling us why, what small group of people's fault it is that isn't Wall Street, that isn't the people bankrolling their studios, and making sure they have like $1 million contracts.
absolutely, dude. That Republican debate was a Democrat debate from 2008. Like, they are just tailing the Democrat Party. But here, we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene, who this is really the same kind of thing as the Libertarian Party, where like as soon as the institutions get their claws in you, it's over on this topic. Because Marjorie Taylor Greene, when she ran, was like a based QAnon wine mom, and she was actually running. And she was talking about 9/11 truth on the campaign trail. But now, a few years later, I mean, look at this. Today, we remember the lives taken from us by the hands of Islamic terrorism 22 years ago. She mentions the Taliban, which, I mean, well, I guess they're both Middle Eastern, so good enough. Like, this could be a fucking Dick Cheney tweet from 30 years ago. I mean,
literally the only thing the
or 20
Taliban
years ago.
was do like what their religion requires, which is not turn away strangers. That's literally the only thing they did to us. And that's if you buy the idea that this was Osama bin Laden doing this.
What other tweets you got? You pulled up like 4 or 5 tweets. Like, how this was, I mean, obviously this is #1 trending on Twitter. But I just wanted to point out that it's #1 trending on Twitter. The hashtag, never forget, and I think it's also trending with September 11th. But Google, which usually has a front page commemorative sticker or for literally every occasion, for like Marie Curie's 150th birthday, or the guy who invented the seatbelt gets a Google front page like splash image, and usually at the very least on 9/11 they have a little black ribbon under the Google search bar on the homepage, but they don't have that this year.
To me, that's an admission of defeat on their part, because that means they know that they no longer control that narrative. They know they can't even bring it up without us shoving the Bush crime family in their face.
Oh,
So
did
they
you
can't
find
bring it up.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, okay, I got this fucking goblins. Okay, just watch this.
9/11 being an inside job. I think that there are people who want to do conspiracy. It's evil.
Can you turn it up?
American
I can't.
murdered
It's got subtitles.
fellow citizens.
Well, and here's the thing. The first mistake he says is to call
Yeah.
them Americans. They're not Americans. All right. First of all, they're globalists. Second of all, if anything, they're British. Right? Like if you trace the lineage of these people, most of these people go back to British royalty. Even Obama. It's like, oh, Obama's our first black president. How folksy. No, he's descended from British royalty on his mom's side. Almost
Also,
all,
like, why would I want to believe that, Dennis Prager? Like, that's
Right.
horrible. Why would I want to believe that?
yeah.
Anyway, let's check this out.
To say nothing of the the gray zone article that came out a couple of months ago that two of those
Dude, wait, did you catch that? Who hated America and Israel? How is Israel the victim here, dude? Like, what? They're always the victim, even when they have nothing to do with it. I mean, according to the official narrative, at least.
Well,
Yeah, Building 7 was in Tel Aviv, didn't you know?
Yeah, like, what? Are you kidding? How are you bringing Israel? Okay, that really pisses me off. But yeah, he says it's clear we know who did it. Yeah, because they found a passport like just on the street. Some like man in black gave it to a cop. They couldn't find the black boxes. They couldn't find a black box from a single one of the planes, but they found the dude's passport made of paper intact. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, he's really not making an argument. He's just like, this is like your dad telling you to calm down and like, oh, the truth is usually clear. That's not true. That's not true. The truth is usually obfuscated. What kind of person thinks the truth is usually clear? You're going to be wrong about everything. This is the PR empire. This is the empire of lies. The truth is not usually clear. But this guy had to throw in the Israel shilling. Like, that's egregious. We can't even, I think, get into that on YouTube, but that's really egregious.
Also, these are the same. He wants to make the argument that it is evil to think that U.S. government officials attack our own citizens, but they are 100% willing to say that all the time. Democrats are attacking us here. Democrats are attacking us there. Democrats and are aiding Antifa to burn down Minneapolis, Seattle. The left, the radical left Democrats are specifically not civilians, government officials are aiding in the violent attack of the country. They say it all the time, except except when it can bolster the war economy, where Raytheon and Halliburton and Boeing and all of these other weapons contractors have something to gain by sending artillery overseas, or can make fighter planes to shock and awe a million Iraqis. That you don't want to question that narrative, because we need to keep making artillery and tanks and warplanes to bomb civilians overseas. You can't question that narrative.
Well, and at this point, we know.
Yeah, only when they can push this sectarianism,
Right.
are they willing to they're 100% willing to say that U.S. government officials are capable of this.
Well, and the thing about it is, when you're talking about basically politicians being in the pockets of these military contractors, that's been going on since Vietnam. LBJ was involved in that. Every single war since Vietnam, you might as well assume someone's getting a payoff. And so for anyone to look at, and for sure, it was obvious in Iraq. You're talking about Dick Cheney being a major shareholder of Halliburton. And everybody knew it. Everybody knew it. So if you live through Iraq and you're not seeing what's going on in Ukraine, and here's another twist on Ukraine, and I saw this coming weeks before it was announced. BlackRock and Monsanto are rebuilding Ukraine. And here's my little conspiracy theory. I think what Ukraine is really about, because Ukraine is one of the breadbaskets of Europe. And so one of the very few things that's based about Europe is they don't accept GMO seeds. So here's the thing. If Monsanto controls Ukraine, then Monsanto has leverage to force GMO on Europe. I'm just saying. I don't have any proof that that's part of the agenda there, but for sure buying up cheap farmland in Ukraine is definitely part of it.
That's interesting. That's definitely worth looking into. But yeah, it is ridiculous that he says, why would they do that? What do you want, a fucking 10,000 word essay? I'll fill your ear about why they did that. But then he says, well, the reason Osama bin Laden did it is just because he hates America and Israel, right? He hates us for our freedom. So that's an acceptable explanation.
Yeah, that's childish.
But the wars for profit in the Middle East, consolidation of power, the Patriot Act, the $4.5 billion that Larry Silverstein got in insurance payouts, the asbestos, there's so much there. But no, why would they do that? They hate us for our freedoms. I hate this guy. I do not like this man. So anyway,
he's smart enough to know better.
Oh yeah, that's another point about this. These people, everyone I've shown so far, they all know. If you're even in touch with elite circles, you know, okay? And that's not just me saying that. There was actually a prime minister of Italy who said after he got out of office that it was common knowledge in the intelligence community that it was a Mossad CIA op.
Right.
And they all know, and they're lying. They're not stupid. He's seen Building 7 collapse. He knows it's sus. He's lying to you. And he's calling you evil. He's calling you evil for having any questions about it. That's just so disgusting. I fucking hate this guy. Oh, I hate his dad energy. You're not my dad. I'm gonna stay out as late as I want, Dennis Prager. I'm not gonna clean my room.
Oh, my God.
All right, let's get some more licks in on Phil Labonte, because he's been. This guy's addicted to Twitter. He's been reacting all weekend,
and 9/11 is no exception. Just needing to get his opinions out there on Twitter.
Yeah.
When he's not lamenting about how he's being surrounded by loony communists on Twitter
and reliving his glory days. He likes doing that a lot. I don't know, man. You're tweeting a lot for a guy in a successful rock band. I don't know much about your band, but anyway.
So actually, I find this whole situation with Phil Labonte to be very interesting, actually. And I have a little bit of a different take from most of the MAGA communists and most of the conservative communist crowd about this guy. And the reason that's the case is because up until about 5 minutes ago, my views were probably a little bit more sophisticated, but really very much in line with what he's saying. And one thing you have to understand is the image of communists in this country has been ruined because of the Fabians. And when someone like Phil Labonte hears someone tell him that he's a communist, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, well, you're a freaking blue-haired, good-for-nothing, lazy piece of shit. Like, seriously, this is the thought process of most people on the right about communists, because the Fabian socialists in this country have managed to ruin the image of communists. Now, I'll say that, and I'll say I'm actually familiar with his music. And back in the day, it was I would say he was probably in the top 10 bands if you liked that kind of sort of metalcore, new metal. I wouldn't call him new metal. He's more like, I guess you could call him metalcore or death metal, something like that. But he was up there. Like All That Remains, it was a good band back in the day.
I will say I'm a bit of a metalhead, and I actually have deliberately not listened to his music because I'm worried I'm going to like it. And I'm making things a little odd.
Like this. Don't worry too much, because I listened to the first song that kind of got me hooked on his music back in the day, and it was hold on, let me look that up again. Give me one moment. Let me look it up again because I'll find it.
But I do want to say I don't think you're the same as this guy, because you're just like a guy who's interested in politics. He's a take seller. He gets paid money for his takes, right? So like look at this tweet. There's the interesting part of this. I'm sure everyone's read it. The interesting part of this tweet is most of the OOs and early teens people generally believe it was planes into the towers flown by Islamic terrorists. Like, what is that? Most people believe it, therefore it's true. Like, it's kind of a mask off moment that he wants to just take the path of least resistance, because he's got the third rails he touches. He'll go after the transgenders and the woke stuff and all that stuff, and then everything else he's just going to take. The reason he's an anti-communist is because he's just taking the path of least resistance, because that's the easy thing to be. You say Molotov-Ribbentrop, you say that Poland bullshit, and nobody's really going to push back on you. It's fine.
That's fair to say. That is fair to say.
And that's all you need to do. So that's what he's doing here too. And I think what's interesting is that he brings up the Saudis, which all I can say for sure is that there was a government cover-up. I can't say for sure like who was involved. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Saudis were involved. But I think the fact that in the last few years it's become sort of socially acceptable to say the Saudis were involved is not a coincidence with the fact that Saudi Arabia just joined BRICS. I think that the reason you're not allowed to question 9/11 is because it's still really important ideologically, and we're going to get to this even more in the next couple. They're still trying to use it ideologically for the same purposes. I mean, first they blamed it on Afghanistan, then they blamed it on Saddam. Now they're trying to blame it on the Saudis right when Saudi Arabia is like fucking us over by joining BRICS. I mean, that's a huge move, because Saudi Arabia is the key to the petrodollar. And now suddenly this ideology is creeping in of like, oh, actually Saudi Arabia did 9/11, you know?
Right. Yeah, because Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, is joining BRICS, and basically since Nixon, Saudi Arabia is how we were able to have the petrodollar. You're right about that. That's very spot on and intelligent. I will also say this. One thing that a lot of people don't realize about Saudi Arabia is that there's a lot of internecine conflict in Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of civil wars that take place in Saudi Arabia that nobody ever hears about because it's monarch to monarch. You know what I mean? And yeah, it was the Saudis. It was the Saudis paid by the CIA, right? Because if you look at Osama bin Laden, he was Mujahideen in Afghanistan at one point, if I remember correctly. I wouldn't swear by that, but if I remember correctly, he was Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and he was a CIA agent. And there's pictures of him with the bushes and everything like that. It's obscene. Like if you can make the step from it was the Taliban to it was the Saudis, you can make the step from it was the Saudis to it was assets, right?
I mean, one would think, but and the other thing is just
Gray Zone. Shout out to the Gray Zone again for that expose they did on the two two of the men who were on the planes who were exposed to have been CIA assets. Like people like Bill Levante just want to ignore when facts like that come out. And 20 years from now, everyone will believe that the CIA was involved in some capacity. And
Everybody believes it now.
yeah,
They
everybody,
say it.
Yeah,
right.
it is.
It'll be-
Like, you
right.
believe
Right. I should say 20 years from now, it'll be like the legacy institutions will have to acknowledge all of the evidence that has since come out, that they can no longer just call individuals conspiracy theorists.
Right.
Like, then most of the legacy institutions, then there'll be people like Bill Levante who are paid to, again, like I said at the beginning of the stream, to like just talk about how normal everything is. Like they'll find some new spin to push the popular narrative coming out of the State Department that Saudi Arabia needs to be carved up into little smaller kingdoms like Gunter Fellinger.
Well, speaking of which, our next tweet is from friend of the show, Gunter Fellinger, who's trying to blame 9/11 on Russia. I mean, why not, right? I can't even hate this guy because he's just so goofy, but is there any speculation of KGB helping Osama bin Laden 9/11 as part of Putin's revenge campaign against West, dismantling his beloved Soviet Union? First of all, Putin tried to join NATO, but whatever. I mean, this is just patently ridiculous.
So,
yeah, the Russia did it to drag us into the Middle East.
I don't know if you guys are aware, probably not, because I'm not really that well known, but I actually lived in Russia from 1993 until 2000. So actually, like right before this happened, really, in the greater scheme of things. And what I will tell you is that under Yeltsin, that country was complete chaos.
Yeah, that decade saw like a huge drop in life expectancy, like 10, 15 year drop in life expectancy from.
Oh yeah, well there were drunks just living on the street everywhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean the life expectancy when we got there was low, and then it got lower throughout the Yeltsin years. Things didn't start to get better until Putin came to office, and at that time they were still struggling to get their shit together. There's no way they could have pulled something like this off. That's stupid. That is straight up stupid. I was there. There's no way. There's no way, because to give you some idea. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of percentages of inflation every year. I learned about inflation at the age of 9. When I went to go out to buy an ice cream cone one day, it was 100 rubles. I grabbed 100 rubles to go buy an ice cream. That next week, my dad told me, said, "That's not going to be enough. You need twice that much." I was like, "Well, that's not right. I mean, I paid 100 rubles yesterday for it." I said, and they had to sit me down and talk to me about inflation, and that's how I learned about it. And inflation didn't even begin to cool off until Putin came to office. And until Putin came to office, what you actually would see a lot of times is you'd see these burned out storefronts, burned out kiosks. And what that was someone failing to pay the mob. The mob was running everything. The government wasn't running shit. I mean, you'd see the militia, because they don't have really, and they have traffic cops, but mostly it's militia, and they would walk the streets and everything like that, but never did anything. Most of the time they weren't even armed. But as soon as Putin came to office, all of a sudden things started turning around. And I'll tell you this, there's a lot more scrutiny on us as Americans being there, which at the time kind of freaked me out. But looking back on it, I get it. I totally get it. America was looting that country, so of course we're being scrutinized. And I understand that entirely now, looking back on it. But yeah, no, things didn't start to get better until Putin was in office. And in 2001, they were still really trying to get their shit together. There's no way this would even be a priority for them. At that point, they still saw America as kind of their friend, actually. They didn't stop seeing America as their friend, I don't think, until Georgia, to be honest with you. I mean, they knew that America was trying to, loot here and there, but they didn't really see us as the enemy until we reacted to them responding to the Georgians.
Yeah, speaking of training Islamic insurgents,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
straight up, the U.S. government trained, and this is the case not just in Russia, like in Chechnya, with
Oh yeah. Yeah,
training
they have their hands full.
insurgents in Chechnya,
Right.
in Xinjiang, China, in Turkey with the PKK, in in Syria with ISIS,
Somalia.
in Somalia, in Nigeria. It's it's all people who have a surprising amount of contact with the U.S. government, getting a lot of weapons from the U.S. government. But Russia was one of the sole examples of countries that recovered from that kind of insurgency, recovered from that kind of foreign intervention, like with the U.S.-backed coup that happened in the '90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. Like it was a really dark decade in the '90s, but when Putin came to power, just slowly building it up to a powerhouse of energy independence and manufacturing and military strength and political unity that it just wasn't in the '90s. That the U.S. has never forgiven Russia for successfully recovering from that intervention in ways that we continue to do in countries like Iraq, where ISIS was born, like in Syria, where Assad still is standing strong against not just the destruction of his country by ISIS, but also these brutal sanctions imposed on such a devastated country by the U.S. So Russia serves as this example of that there is the possibility of recovery. That's why Gunter Fellinger is making sure that to let people know that the mistake that the U.S. deep state made in the '90s was not carving Russia up into tiny little pieces. So Gunter Fellinger has a map of Russia carved into 56 ethnic states. He's doing the same thing with Saudi Arabia. He has a little map on his Twitter of like, this is Saudi Arabia carved up into 6 different kingdoms. He's done the same thing to Brazil. More recently, he started talking about he's going to do the same thing to India if India doesn't break away from BRICS.
I don't think that our empire is going to last that long. And the reason I say that is because how are we going to make that happen when now there's and look here, the truth of the matter is it's going to take a while for BRICS to get off the ground, but the petrodollar's done. Saudi Arabia joining BRICS, that's the end of the petrodollar. And actually, I think the beginning of the end of the petrodollar is when we cut Russia off from the SWIFT system. I was shocked when we did that. Because like, how are we going to cut one of the largest economies in the world off from the global economy? And now Saudi Arabia joining BRICS, that happened a lot faster than I would have thought, to be honest with you. I would have thought that would have taken at least a decade. But no, it's done. It's done. I don't see us having, because without dollar dominance over the globe, we have nothing. So I don't see the American empire lasting long enough to get that done. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a little suspicious. I think there's some sleeper agents in BRICS personally, because Egypt that doesn't really make sense. Egypt is one of our closest allies in that area, and that doesn't really make sense to me. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how it goes.
Egypt also controls the Suez Canal, so having it accepted into BRICS and understanding the long game of if they can have someone who is friendly to BRICS cooperation, who if they have access to the Suez Canal, that's just one more way to avoid sanctions by Europe and the United States. If not, just using control of the Suez Canal to enforce sanctions against Europe, who is very reliant on the Suez Canal.
Well, I'll say this. I think for us to be looking at waterways like that, the BRICS nations are going to have to beef up their navies. Now, I know China has a big navy, right? But their navy isn't really built for supporting global trade. It's more for supporting the defense of the Chinese coast. So I think BRICS would have to build up its navy before they could really use the Suez Canal anyway. That's just my impression. Anyway, I don't know. You tell me.
That is true. There is sort of a piracy aspect where, like, the Navy just sees Iranian oil tankers whenever they want to, right? I mean, that's what Skull and Bones is, right? They're pirates.
Yeah. How about
Anyway, okay, so Gunther's kind of a clown. This is pretty silly, but I wanted to bring it up because what he's trying to do here in his like clown shoes way is he's trying to use 9/11 again, like double dip. It was used for one war, and he's trying to use it for another. And while this is pretty silly, I wanted to bring up something that is maybe not so silly, which is this book I became aware of recently. It came out in the last couple of years, called Seeds of Terror by the CNN Jakarta bureau chief, Maria Ressa. And the thesis of this book is that actually 9/11 was plotted by Al-Qaeda terror cells in the Philippines and Indonesia. And it seems to me that this book is sort of laying the ideological groundwork for an Indo-Pacific shift. Like, actually, we got to go into the Philippines and Indonesia, right around China, right? And what's the justification? It's 9/11. It's still 9/11, 22 years later. And that's why nobody has a good take on this, because they're still using it. I mean, it's got legs, dude. 9/11's got legs. Like, goddamn.
It's got legs. It doesn't have legs. Nobody's gonna buy that shit.
I think you're probably right. I can't imagine.
And here's the thing. Look, they can print all the money they want, but it's not going to happen for one simple reason. How in the fuck are they going to get the recruits to make it happen?
Yeah.
Nobody who would join the army right now.
Yeah,
I think that's right. It's because like
well, we'll get into that. Well, I have some I have some clips pulled up of a Chris Christie interview from the All In podcast. You know, because they needed to get.
Oh, Chris Christie was on All In.
Yeah, they needed to scrape the bottom of the barrel of everyone who was on that debate stage. But yeah, I mean, they don't increasingly need U.S. soldiers, like people in the U.S. military, to fight in these kinds of wars. It's increasingly hybrid warfare on the part of just hiring nationals from the country or the region where the war is going on, like in bulk, like with Ukraine, but also forming death squads and mercenary groups that are private contractors who happen to be United States citizens. And that's as we're now finding out from people like Boniface McClellan, who helped form the seat of the Azov Battalion, who was an American citizen, and a lot of those beginning stages of Azov being American neo-Nazis, Blackwater in the Iraq War, and so on. And so, like this hybrid warfare of private military contractors being the footprint of American boots on the ground.
So it would have to be more so American military contractors than locals, because what I will tell you is what's going on in Ukraine is, in my humble opinion, a little bit of an anomaly in that sense, because there you have one of the best trained armies in Europe. In most places in the world, if you hire locals, most militaries are not trained well enough to really get the job done. Not the job that we need them to get done. So we either have to send in our own troops or military contractors in most places in the world. For sure, when we were in the Middle East, the locals that we tried to train up did not get the job done at all. Honestly, like when we were in Iraq, if we were really interested in rebuilding Iraq, we wouldn't have disbanded the Baathists, because the Baathists had their shit together. The Baathists had an actual military force that was actually well trained, well disciplined, well indoctrinated, and they had gotten the job done for decades. We disbanded them, and then there was nothing left. There's nothing left to really run that country. And And so, and I'm not as familiar with these other places in the world, but something tells me it would have to be more so military contractors than locals. And you'd still have to bring in American troops because you'd have to build out these FOBs and the infrastructure to actually carry out these missions.
All right, so after all this coal shoveling, I wanted to end on a high note and give a shout out to People's Party, unequivocal good take. 9/11. Well, I don't know if we can say that. 9/11 was you can read it.
Right.
There you go. Base People's Party, and this is why Cornel West got talked out of running with these people. Because go find me a Green Party tweet like this. I'm just saying, it's because they're actually not beholden to the kind of institutions who will come in and stop you from speaking truth on this topic and various other topics. But this is a really big one, and the fact that they'll tweet this, shout out People's Party, shout out Nick Brana, love it. And the one last thing I want to bring up, I was just made aware of this before the stream, but look at Ron DeSantis' tweet. Of all people, Ron DeSantis says, decades later, we as a nation still owe full transparency and accountability to grieving families who lost loved ones on 9/11. Interesting. I wish I had a take on this, but I have no idea why Ron DeSantis is allowed to tweet this. It's very curious. I just discovered this when we were starting streaming. What do you guys think is going on with this tweet?
I mean, it's an incredibly vague.
Yeah, it's better than the rest we saw, though, isn't it?
Yeah, when
It is sort of the same thing Vivek said, or where he was like, when he was with Alex Stein, and he was like,
yeah,
well, it's sort of weird.
Transparency and accountability could literally apply to all of the work in getting money for the families of the firemen who died or got sick on 9/11 that John Stewart has been doing for 2 decades.
That's true. It is vague enough.
Of transparency and accountability for where's the money to the first responders.
It is vague enough to kind of mean anything, but it is very embarrassing that Ron DeSantis has a better tweet than Marjorie Taylor Greene. I will say that much. She's that terrible tweet from her. She's done. She fell off. All right, so that's all I got. But we can move on. Yeah, I don't know. I just the reason I think these right-wing guys are making overtones is because you've got guys like Alex Stein, like Nick Fuentes, like people who are really unequivocal about yeah, it was obviously an inside job. And what's really embarrassing is that the left has just completely ceded this to the right. I remember when I was early on a leftist, I was on one of these leftist forums years ago when Trump was president. And I posted some 9/11 meme and I got crazy ratioed. And I was like, all right, well, it's what I said in the beginning. It's my litmus test. It's the core of my politics. And it's like, what? If leftists are all about eat the rich, overthrow the state, we're the revolutionaries, but you won't even call out 9/11. You cede that to the right. That's a right-wing anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. So who's going to believe you when you say you're anti-establishment, you want to eat the rich? I mean, who's paying attention and who knows what's been going on for the last 20 years? Because 9/11 was our Reichstag fire. I don't think it was just about the $2.3 trillion. I think the big thing was the Patriot Act. I mean, they jumped on that Patriot Act right away. And they got that shit, and they got that shit through the DHS, NSA, ICE, this whole security state.
All of which
from 9/11.
All of which who are now directly responsible, like Department of Homeland Security and these intelligence agencies who are working hand in glove with the cartels at the U.S.-Mexico border, which we'll get into.
Yeah. So you're going to say, we don't like the Patriot Act, but then, 9/11 conspiracies are, that's right-wing anti-Semitic. I don't believe you. I don't believe that you're against the Patriot Act because you're lying on behalf of the people who passed it. You're repeating their lie.
Well, I will tell you when the left became irredeemable because I was there. I saw it happen. So to your point, the whole thing with the unjust war in Iraq, I didn't know about the debt at that time, but the unjust war in Iraq and then the Patriot Act, that's what turned me because I was raised in a Republican household. I grew up Republican, mainstream Republican. But those two things turned me from being Republican to being a libertarian. And at that time, there was an equivalence that could be made between the left and the right, because the right was better on some things, the left was better on some things. When it came to civil liberties, when it came to being constitutionally consistent, when it came to the Fourth Amendment and the First Amendment, the left was better than the right at that time. And then they elected Obama. And look, Obama said all the right things. Obama played the part. Obama was very well spoken, very intelligent. And if you really read between the lines, you could see he was full of shit. But I didn't hate anybody for being duped by him because, he was very charismatic and he was saying all the right things. But then he got into office and he did all the exact same things that George W. Bush did and expanded them and made them worse. And that's when they should have turned on him. That's when the left should have said, look, you talk the talk, now you're not walking the walk. And they didn't. They bought into it. And when that happened, they became evil. Because here's the thing, you can't get behind something like that and stay behind it for a certain period of time without your unconscious accepting it and integrating it into who you are. And so when they didn't reject Obama, when Obama didn't do what he said he was going to do, the left became irredeemable in this country. And that's when that happened.
But I want to respond to Screws and a Bell. Yes, the NSA predates 9/11, but 9/11 is when they really ramped up the spying power, and it was all justified on the basis of we have to stop the terrorists. They never actually stopped any terrorists. I think they arrested like one taxi driver, and that's it. But that was, it's the whole security state. The justification was you're with us or you're with the terrorists. That's what it was. And that mania has died down, but all these institutions still have their emergency powers, right? The emergency never goes away in de jure, right? Just de facto. But in law, they never give up their powers when the mania dies down. So NSA was definitely not spying the way it does now before 9/11. It was a whole, all this insane shit that's happening now. Like people being thrown in jail for memes, people being wiretapped, like Trump being wiretapped by Obama and all this stuff. This finds its origin in 9/11. That's when they found all these powers. And not only that, but the rhetoric of the war on terror is now being turned on Americans. Americans are being called domestic terrorists. January 6 people are domestic terrorists. Even parents who go to school board meetings are domestic terrorists. And that's dangerous rhetoric, guys. Like that's a threat. When they call you a terrorist, that's a threat. Yeah, exactly. When they call you a terrorist, that means they can send the extraordinary rendition you to Gitmo with no trial and nobody's going to bat an eye. That's what it means when they call you a fucking terrorist. So don't ignore that rhetoric is now being turned back on us, which was always the intention, right? And also these like false flag, like the FBI used to do this shit where they would like honeypot Muslim teenagers who were depressed to try and convince them to do terrorist attacks. Now they're doing that to MAGA people, like with the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot. And with January 6th also. All these tools that they developed, it was always intended to be turned on the American people. Like Iraq and Afghanistan is one thing. The real prize is America, all right? Because it's like you said, these people aren't American. They're British or they're from other countries. And we're the prize. And they're reaping the rewards now by turning this 9/11 anti-terrorist state back on the American people, which was always the goal. I'm done. You guys can go.
Well, that's a deep rabbit hole right there you're talking about. So then you're talking about the Atlantean Project. You're talking about, depending on who you ask, the Danites. You're talking about all kinds of crazy shit. That's some of it's even I'm still trying to wrestle with to see if I actually believe it or not. But that goes into a lot of. But yes, we're Babylon, right?
Yeah, New Atlantis. I've got some crazy. If you want to see some crazy shit, I got some crazy shit. I can pull up real quick.
Hang on, I think my internet connectivity is coming back.
Oh, I wondered why you were just like sitting there still.
Yeah, I am very disciplined.
You were like staring me down. I was like, did I say something wrong? What's going on?
No, yeah, I lost connectivity for a bit, but I do want to pivot. So we for the to follow up on this 9/11 React recap, I want to posit to you guys and to the audience, obviously, this narrative that the U.S. government is cooking up that it's Islamic terrorists are we're the number one threat to America 20 years ago. Now it's whatever it is, the threat du jour, white supremacy or whatever it is, or or anti-Semitism, whatever the government wants to think the biggest threat is. Colonel Douglas Macgregor tweeted today that let me read it off here. He says, "Our country is not safe in the hands of the people in Washington." Colonel Douglas Macgregor being a retired general who was often kicked out of war room meetings for having opinions like this. He says, "I don't care if it's Biden, McConnell, or someone else. These people are all focused on self-enrichment. They have financialized the economy and diverted the democratic process." So he hit the nail on the head in saying that the number one threat are the men in Washington. And I wanted to bring up three distinct, interrelated but distinct threats for where those internal attacks are coming from, specifically from members of Congress, from the intelligence communities, and from the actual military bureaucracy itself. And we can begin with any one of those, but depending on which you think is the biggest threat. I personally think it's the intelligence community, but members of Congress and people have been really up in arms about what's been going on in Arizona with what's her name, the governor, I forget her name, one of the congresswomen who imposed that a Second Amendment ban, the right to carry arms, just suspended it in places like Albuquerque. And because of a state of emergency of gun violence. How gun violence was, again, the number one threat in the United States. It's gun violence. It's individual madmen with guns. And so we're going to suspend this constitutional right. People have been really up in arms about that. Even my relatives, on the other side of the country, have been talking to me, calling me up on the phone. It's like, did you hear about what's going on in Arizona? So that's also worth talking about. So we can. PJ, which of those three do you think is the biggest threat? Intelligence communities, permanent politicians in Congress, or the military bureaucracy?
Well, they're all interrelated, right? So it's one big thing, right? If you're talking about the most present threat of those three, obviously it's the intelligence community. But if you're talking about the most long-term threat, to be honest with you, it's probably the permanent bureaucracy. And the reason I say that is because these permanent bureaucracies, that run like little fiefdoms, right? And so you have to expand your bureaucracy to get more clout. And then as you expand more bureaucracy, you expand your power. And then once you expand your power to a certain extent, then you get on the take, right? And then once you're on the take, now you start doing things that are not in the best interests of the American people. And these bureaucracies are very difficult to root out. because they're always someone's pet project, right? So it's hard to get rid of them once they're there.
Yeah, so I pulled up if you want to, like, if you think long term, it's the military bureaucracy. I have, so one of the deep state spooks that I follow, for those of you in the audience who have been following the barracks for a while, you know that I love to talk about think tank Nazi Peter Zion, who has his own YouTube channel, and he likes to give advice to weapons contractors, to people in the military, of what their focus needs to be in terms of military strategy, and just feeding them scripts that they can use to justify, the disastrous policies that have been going on overseas in places like Ukraine. He posted this today. I didn't even know. Apparently, I didn't even know this was going on. This is such an asinine video. It's only 3 minutes long, so I think it's worth going through. But he talks about, on 9/11, says the greatest threat to American national security, and he talks about it is this 8 months long. 8 month long sort of protest going on by a governor who has been halting military promotions. And if you look on like New York Times, if you look on Washington Post, they're also talking about this today at the same time that Peter Zion is like dropping this video. Like there's this script going around. But yeah, I'll let him talk about. I'll let him familiarize you with the script that again the government wants you to.
Before we get into this, I want to make a point, which is you mentioned intelligence agencies, the Washington bureaucracy, and the military bureaucracy, but I think there's one important one to add, which is the big pharma, because you're talking about these like pharma or I mean these bureaucrats who like get on the take, and you're describing Fauci to a T, right? And we're talking about the Building 7 and the Pentagon got memory hold, but what else got memory hold was the anthrax attacks, which is in October of 2001, there were these anthrax attacks, which were targeted at the Democratic congressmen who were opposed to the Patriot Act, got sent anthrax in the mail. And then when they were talking about weapons of mass destruction, it wasn't just nukes. I mean, obviously, we don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud, right? But it's also bioweapons. And this is because Nixon had agreed with this international treaty to ban bioweapons. And then after 9/11, suddenly biowarfare became this big problem again with these anthrax attacks. And they sort of did this like fake out where they were saying, well, we need to defend against we need to like research biowarfare to defend against it. And that's when Big Pharma really started to take off with this biowarfare stuff. They start having these like huge stockpiles of vaccines, huge payouts to pharma companies. And then, I mean, we all know where that eventually led. I don't know. But
yeah, I didn't pull up any relevant clips for Big Pharma. So, but
yeah, and if you don't know, the anthrax was actually traced back to Fort Detrick, and the FBI did an investigation and said this stuff came from Fort Detrick, and they wanted to bring this guy in to testify, and he committed suicide, and then they dropped it. Committed suicide. Yeah.
So here's I found the BBC article that is talking about what Peter Zion is talking about here. Yeah, it was Senator Tommy Tuberville who has put on a military blockade because he doesn't like that the military is paying for abortions, and so he's been blocking military promotions. And people in the media have been calling it the biggest threat to national security. that we can't promote these military bureaucrats.
Talk about the largest significant national security threat facing the United States. It's not terrorism from the Middle East. One of the things that we have learned over the 20 years in the war on terror is that most of the militants, most of the Islamists are interested in fighting what they call the near enemy. Doesn't mean that the risk to the United States is zero, but most of these folks are far more concerned with the war that is right in front of them, taking the conflict to sectarian opponents or groups that they think are apostates who are right there. Throwing a Hail Mary through a transcontinental flight, that is something that is simply difficult to do, and most don't have the capacity to try. I also don't think it's China. China is dependent on the international system as maintained by the United States. And even if Chairman Xi Jinping's cult of personality decides to pull the trigger on a war with, say, Taiwan, the United
He is right, by the way, that these, again, like we said earlier, these Islamic terrorist groups that were trained by the U.S. military, they're a bigger threat to the regions where they live, because that was the whole point of training these insurgents in the first place. I mean, so like he reveals a lot there, and he goes on.
What is this angle? What is this angle we've got? Like, talk down to me, why don't you, sir?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about Peter Zeihan. He travels a lot. He's like always in New Zealand or Colorado. He flies to all these like vistas.
He likes to hike, doesn't he?
Yeah, he likes to hike. So he's always on top of a mountain.
That's right.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. When I said we were going to break new ground, I was actually speaking specifically about this. Reason being is because I've wanted to get a conservative communist take on Peter Zeihan for a long time, because I watch a lot of his videos. I consider him to be one of the most charismatic and compelling representatives of the deep state that there are. And the reason he actually came to my attention before is because I follow a lot of economic news, and one thing that bothered me is that no one was talking about the effect of China's one-child policy. So when they were talking about China, and he's the first person who really laid it out in a really thorough way, and then I learned something from it that I didn't learn things from it that I hadn't even been aware of. And so that's what told me. He's like, this is one of the guys. I'm sure he lies as often as he tells the truth.
Oh yeah, he's 100% a dilettante. Like he looks up like Wikipedia stats and
he lets
and broad historical points about countries that he doesn't like, in order to. He's from this old Sam Huntington school of conservative realism, where perceived enemies of the United States can only be subdued by destroying them, and not by pessimism.
No, all of his takes are horrible as far as like his policy recommendations for the U.S. because he makes us. Well, for one thing, he's on the Ukraine bandwagon hook, line, and sinker, which is insane to me. But his takes are deep state, but they're more sophisticated than most of the takes that I hear from the deep state. So I've been wanting to actually get.
Right. That's his whole job, is to go on the circuit, giving talks to present to these military contractors, think tank, policymakers, and authors, podcasters, to give them the script to give to everyone else.
Well done for taking this guy on, because it's one thing to take on Dennis Prager, it's another thing to take on this guy.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try and skip the part about his talking. He wants China and Russia to dissolve in his lifetime. So I'm just gonna skip the parts where he talks about China. He's a goofball and doesn't know anything about China or Russia. So, and then they'll get into this Tommy Tuberville thing, which he unironically calls the greatest threat to American national security.
Famine and a deindustrialization would crush China as a country within a year. That leaves Russia. Now, Russia is obviously a concern, especially with the war in Ukraine. But as long as the war is bottled up in Ukraine or in Russia proper, that it's not coming for NATO. So while this is definitely something to keep an eye on and is a big concern, it has huge implications, I don't see, at least in the midterm, as the single largest threat the United States faces. I think that's closer to home, because in the United States right now, we've got over 300 top military professionals who can't even qualify for their security clearances, making it impossible for them to get the information that they need to plan for whatever's next. We have hobbled ourselves or more to the point, a specific individual in Congress has done the hobbling. Senator Tuberville of Alabama has put a blanket hold on the nominations, on the confirmations of all military personnel as part of a tiff within the culture war. Now, whether you stand on that culture war, that is your prerogative, but in blocking officers from participating in their jobs, if you can't get confirmed, you can't get the information, you can't get clearance, and you can't make a plan.
He's making it seem like this is a new thing. Tommy Tuberville has been imposing this blockade for 8 months. So it's laughable that people have been like the BBC wrote an article about it 3 days ago. It's laughable that they're talking about it now. Like if we haven't seen any consequences of it, and we haven't heard the news talk about it for 8 months, probably not the greatest threat to national fucking security.
So he has taken the single most powerful military force in the world and gutted its leadership's ability to lead, which means that either Senator Tuberville is one of the most skilled Chinese agents ever, or he's the dumbest person in Congress. And if you think of the personalities in Congress, that's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, what he's talking about is specifically Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville. He's blocked about 300 individuals over the past 8 months for military promotions,
Which is a drop in the bucket.
But specifically 300 individuals who, like, after they retire, we know what revolving door they're going to be going into. Like, that's the whole point of the military-industrial complex, this military bureaucracy at this point, is you get promoted in order to retire and become a board member of Raytheon and Halliburton. Just like Lloyd Austin, who is the current what is his official title? Look it up real quick. It's the actual Secretary of Defense, like, you know, the position that Colin Powell had 20 years ago. The Secretary of Defense, who is a board member of Raytheon. Like, that's the whole.
How is that allowed? How is that allowed?
That's the whole. And Chris Christie talks about this in the All In podcast. It's just like, Chris Christie is too milquetoast to say that, he says like, oh yeah, I'll look into that if I'm president.
You know, it's almost like military contractors shouldn't be run for profit.
100%. Like 300 individuals who aren't going to be able to get these triple-decker McMansions in the suburbs of Virginia. That's the biggest threat to national security, is that we can't expand the suburbs of Langley. That's obscene. That, on the anniversary of 9/11, you have people who work for the U.S. government talking to everyone else that, or really just talking to each other, because that's what Peter Zion, he talks to other deep state spooks. Just talking to each other.
I will say that
the biggest threat is to your wallet.
Right.
And then everyone who talks to the regular public, they're saying, oh yeah, believe the regular narrative. We need to expand the central security state, the surveillance state. We need to tighten up the austerity measures against wine moms at school board meetings. And that's the narrative that we get as average citizens.
I will say that his economic takes are far more interesting than his political takes, because his political takes are cringy, but his economic takes are a little bit more interesting. If you get the opportunity to listen to some of them.
Oh yeah, he was the one who last year was going on one of his circuit tours, talking about the opportunity to use old military equipment from Afghanistan and pivot it to a war in Mexico. He was calling Mexico the new Afghanistan, and talking to oil tycoons in Texas about how much opportunity there was in Texas to start, drilling for oil to boost up the war economy. So that's the only time where he starts. That's the only time where he starts.
When he's talking to the adults.
Yeah, when he's talking to the adults, when he's not spending all of his time talking about how much he hates Russia and he wants Russia to collapse, he's talking to members of oil refineries and
And
oil.
agricultural combines and things like that.
Yeah, really. If there is a progeny of Nazism in America, it's Peter Zeihan.
Well, he also seems like sort of a throwback to like the days when our enemies were like Kissinger, which, say what you will about Kissinger. Kissinger knew how to play the game like nobody else. Whereas now we've got like these geriatric dinosaurs in Congress and like NAFO killer clowns. It's like, it's a joke. I mean, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't be complaining. Like, it's good to have jokes for enemies, but
But see, that's the thing, though, is are they really your enemies? Or are the people pulling their strings the enemies? That's the thing. Like, you see
that's
someone
true.
like
I mean, Kissinger's still around.
Yeah.
And this was another.
I'm sorry, Biden.
Recently.
Biden. But I think actually Obama's pulling Biden's strings. There's a lot of speculation that actually Biden is sitting in like a bunker somewhere, basically word for word telling Biden what to say.
Yo, I think I'm gonna go schizo. I think it's a dude in a mask. I legitimately think that. I don't think that like the oscillation between like complete brain melted dementia patient and then like he goes out for that like red light fascist speech and he's like killing it. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I've seen what kind of mask the CIA has. They could do it. Why wouldn't they? I'm just saying. The most epic moment would be if at the debate Trump just like ripped his mask off, and it would imagine that. There's like some spook. All right. Anyway,
Hey, look,
You mentioned how when people like Peter Zeihan start talking about the economy, that's when they really start trying to. That's when they really start trying to push the hardest for policy change. This came out in the New York Times today. Again, I'm pulling this up from the Onion router, dark web, to be able to read the New York Times because I don't want to pay for a subscription. But this, again, it's offensive to be like posting this stuff on 9/11. It is like deeply offensive to start talking about expanding the war economy like on the anniversary of our Reichstag fire when 3,000 people were killed in order to justify bombing a bunch of countries in the Persian Gulf. It just the article and this goes into, for those of you watching, it says, as Ukraine aid benefits their districts, some House Republicans opposed it. So it's this article talking about how the war in Ukraine is actually good for American jobs. How this artillery factory that employs 125 people in Mesquite, Texas, could close. If we stop the war in Ukraine, we're not going to be able to have this artillery factory in Mesquite, Texas. Or we're not going to be able to make Stingray missiles out of Ocala, Florida, guys. Like the 50 people who make Stingray missiles out of Ocala, Florida are not going to have a job anymore if we pull out of Ukraine. And it's a really long article that goes into how Republicans Republicans have the nerve to want to pull out of Ukraine, which it's on and on and on. Yeah, I would love for them to talk about, hey, this will create manufacturing jobs in the U.S. This will create advanced manufacturing jobs in the U.S. Alexander Helger, the president of the Mesquite Chamber of Commerce, said in an interview in his office. Lawmakers who oppose continued aid to Kyiv are effectively voting against your constituents at that point, he said. You're literally saying no to the people you're representing. and
Well, and that's the ultimate, really, of broken window economics, right? Because the only reason to build an artillery shell is to break a window in another country, right? So then the idea is, oh well, we manufacture an artillery shell, and now we get to send people over there to, install a new window in Ukraine, right? Oh, well, we've created economic activity.
And as always, the New York Times buries the lead. They bury the point of their articles in the last two paragraphs. You should always skip the New York Times full article and just read the last two paragraphs to see what they're getting at. And the last two paragraphs, they say, their stance, being Republicans, their stance breaks with decades of bipartisan support for feeding the military-industrial complex. The NY Times just saying the quiet part out loud there, that they support bipartisan support for the military-industrial complex. Saying, nowhere is that disconnect more apparent than in Mesquite, Texas. The city had no foothold in the defense industry before the Ukraine war, created skyrocketing demand for 155 milliliter shells, the ammunition fired from howitzers, long-range weapons central to the artillery battles that have defined much of the conflict. Just talking about artillery shells as if, like the supply and demand politics of artillery shells as if they're, as if it's stocks of Netflix or Facebook. And the last paragraph here, again, saying the quiet part out loud, the U.S. government plans to expand 155 milliliter shell production from pre-Ukraine war levels of less than 15,000 per month to 90,000 per month. And Mesquite's plant is expected to contribute about 20,000 toward that goal once it comes online in early 2020. So, again, just reminding people that the Ukraine war has depleted American ammunition and artillery. Like the U.S. military is out of ammo to defend itself because it's all been shipped to this proxy war in Ukraine. And let me close that out there. And so the people who are complaining that they aren't getting enough, who aren't getting enough promotions in the military, are trying to ramp up production of stockpiles, not for national defense, but to continue sending to Ukraine into perpetuity, building up a war economy, just like Hitler did in the 1930s. This promise that building up a war economy could revitalize, the German manufacturing economy, would battle inflation, would bring back so many German jobs, as he was, preparing to invade Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia.
Yeah.
Ultimately failed. His grand strategy of being bankrolled by U.S. banksters and British banksters to enslave all of Europe backfired, and he failed. Yeah. And Germany, West Germany, remained a shithole, while East Germany, is partitioned by the Soviet Union, and everything east of the Berlin Wall was actually lifting people out of feudal serfdom and increasing the life expectancy. Yeah, Kevin Tui said Lebensraum, the German policy of expansion. That's what this is now.
Yeah.
That's
we've definitely created some growing room for Monsanto and BlackRock in Ukraine.
Yeah, living space for Monsanto. Well, this is why they never outsourced the weapons production. Because what better way to win over the working class to imperialism than to make their rice bowl dependent on making weapons, right? And they publish these kind of articles all the time. Like, oh, well, your district is getting benefited, right? You're making submarines, you're making bombs, you're making whatever. That's why this is what never got outsourced, because not only, they're right? All the people who work there, they don't want the Ukraine war to end because they're getting paid. And it's a tough life out here. I don't blame them. You gotta get the bread somehow, right? But this is one of the only options they've given us. It's either you're gonna go be a prostitute to some degree, either in the service sector, or you're gonna go make guns. And if you're making guns, yeah, you kind of have to be pro-war. even if you are against war, like in principle, at the end of the day, we're materialists, right? The way you feed yourself, that's going to override everything else. It's hard to make a man understand something when his paycheck relies on him not understanding it. And that's the ruling class very much understands that. And that's why they never outsource the weapons production. That's why all these congressmen are always fighting to get new like factories, new military bases in their districts, because they're going to get a base that supports imperialism, whether it's, you know, in their broader class interests or not. It's in their immediate livelihood interest, and that's the most important thing. I mean, yeah, if the Ukraine war ends, they might get laid off. So
Yeah.
it's that simple.
And it is very, very, very hard to speak out against the hand that's feeding you. I've done it before. It's hard. It's really hard. And then you try to talk to people about it, and you get violent reactions. You try to talk someone out of their paycheck, you get violent reactions.
And it's not even just from a employment perspective. One of the big reasons we wanted to have you on was, you know, as someone who was in the military, it's not just like employment, but it's also people who are employed by the military or in police precincts. So they're not working in factories. They're working in making sure that that national security is like their priority. Like they're making sure that people don't die.
Right.
And they are increasingly the loudest voices in pushing back. Not in a majority, but when they do push back, it is those people in the military, like not just Colonel Douglas Macgregor, but just rank and file people in police forces in different cities or in the National Guard that are pushing back against this war economy, this American Lebensraum.
Right.
Well, I pulled up the tweet here with the Arizona gun ban, where Senator, what's her name? Senator Michelle Grisham had suspended Second Amendment rights in Arizona. There was a gun rally yesterday in Albuquerque. I'll pull it up here.
Well, as you're pulling it up, what I'll say is if a man isn't fighting for his constitutional rights and he's not fighting for the well-being of his people, then he's fighting because he's getting paid. And if he's fighting because he's getting paid, then when it's time for him to go fight, he'll do everything he can to weasel out of it. He'll do everything he can to weasel out of it. And if he does go, good chance he's a psychopath.
Oh yeah, did you have a chance to see our reporting on the CIA-backed mercenary group out of Orlando?
I didn't. No.
Yeah, I posted on the Barracks account over the weekend, so we can go back and I can screen share that. But I said, if you didn't know, I had done some digging over the weekend because some Telegram groups I followed had posted this recruitment video by a group called Spartan Applications Group to recruit people, American citizens, to fight for death squads in Myanmar. They
Really?
said, yeah, they were playing Fortunate Son as the
Oh my God.
as the the hype music for the video,
Jesus
showing
Christ.
Myanmar death squads. Saying, yeah, like Fortunate Son, the song from Apocalypse Now,
Right.
like the Lawrence Lawrence.
Yeah, the
Clear-
Dead Daisies actually do a cover of that song. It's actually pretty good.
This anti-war song from Apocalypse Now, and anti-Vietnam War movie where the U.S. military was the bad guys, but just playing that song to recruit the type of people who saw the U.S. military as the good guys in that movie, like the psychopaths who want to go back to killing Asian people. And they have this compound in Lake Weir, Florida, an hour north of Orlando, where the Blood Tribe had that rally last week. And they're in a couple of days, like in September 14th, they're having a training session that you need to pay $1,000 a pop to go join their compound to train in sniper fire.
Yeah, it's a class filtering for class, right?
Now, hold on.
All that humanitarian aid you do in Ukraine that needs special sniper fire training.
It's you're not talking about Spartan Tactical, are you?
Yeah, that's the website, Spartan Tactical.
Spartan Tactical is running that.
That's the web, SpartanTactical.com, yeah. SAG Tactical.
You know them?
I've been to their course. It's a phenomenal course. By the end of that course, I was engaging targets with an M4 at 800 yards with a CCO and hitting it 30% of the time. If I'd been firing with an ACOG, it probably would have been closer to 50, 60% of the time.
Yeah, the website is sagtactical.com, yeah.
What
I'm disappointed to hear that because I know who the guy is who run. If that really is Spartan Tactical, I'm really disappointed to hear that because I know the guy who runs it.
Yeah, I can.
Well, they had a slogan on their website, Tertia Optio, which is a CIA special ops slogan.
Oh, it might be a different group. Then. It might be a different group. But Spartan Tactical, that's a legit group. Those people are. It's all special forces guys. It's all former special forces guys, and they get you very proficient with a rifle.
Yeah, I encourage you to go and go.
Right.
What's that URL again?
Sagtactical.com. SAGtactical.com.
That sounds different from what
Right.
I was, and I hope it is because I thought those were really good. Oh yeah, that's a different logo. That's somebody else.
Right. Well, I mean, Spartans.
That's Spartans.
Yeah, everyone in the military wants to be like the Spartans, right? It's not. I want to bring up a point when we're talking about recruiting psychopaths, and this might be a little controversial, but I'm gonna call out. I'm gonna go the Hillary Clinton route and call out the violent video games because I think. No, I'm serious.
Old school, man. That's old school.
People stopped talking about it, but it kept happening. I think a big part of it, because I remember playing Call of Duty 2 when I was 14 years old, and there was this mission called No Russian, where you go to an airport and you shoot up a bunch of Russian civilians. That's always who the enemies are in that game, isn't it? It's always Russians and Arabs, right? And I remember that game being crazy violent. And it kind of seems like they're trying to find people who are really gung-ho about committing horrible violence to Russians. And then well, if you really like that, come do a real thing. And you can come commit horrible violence to Russians in real life. And I mean, they release one of these games every year. And it's always fucking Russians, man. You're always fighting Russians. For decades, it's been Russians. They've been planning this shit. I really think a lot of the animus to Russians has been programmed into people, not just in video games, in Hollywood too. The villain's always a Russian, John Wick, Training Day. It's always some evil Russian. But yeah, I'm sorry. I think the fact that little kids are playing games where they shoot up Russian civilians and try and get high scores, yeah, I think that's coloring people's opinion of the war today. The fact that everyone in my generation shot up an airport full of Russian civilians when they were teenagers. It's dehumanizing, And now today we're at war with Russia. It's oh, I remember them. Those are the people you shoot up at the airport. And, stab in the neck and all that kind of shit.
Yeah, PJ, since you haven't seen the tweet, is this tweet? We got some good traction on it the other day. So yeah, Spartans Applications Group. So not different from your group.
Thank God.
So I said we did a stream about this 2 days ago, so I won't go fully into detail. You can go back and watch that stream. But yeah, this group posted this recruiting video playing "Fortunate Son" as the soundtrack. So we really have to talk about why.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. You look at this shit. It looks like Call of Duty. They're trying to. It's like if I'm like a Call of Duty head, I'm gonna look at that and be like, "Oh, that's so cool." I don't know. Maybe I'm onto nothing.
I mean, I was looking at it and I was like, that's the most unprofessional shit I've ever seen.
Yeah. So while
Why are they standing out there in the open? Why are they yelling from behind concealment, not even cover? Like, anyway, that rubbed me the wrong way just on a tactical level. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
yeah, so they'll be recruiting for death squads that have been committing the Rohingya genocide since like 2014 back in Myanmar to fight against the evil communist junta that happened, and it's wild. So if any more information, if we can find any more information about that, since they're going to be having their training session in a couple of days, I will make sure to continue reporting on that, because it continues to shock me that their training compound is just an hour north of Orlando, where the Blood Tribe Nazis had been flown out to have their rally.
I want to.
Yeah, because people like Boneface McClellan and Christopher Polehouse also has a training compound in Maine, just like the SAG group has. And so that was the crime of people like Boneface McClellan back in 2012 when he tried to start a race war. Is he didn't do it with the express permission of the U.S. government. Starting a race war is what other countries do, like in Myanmar. Crazy.
That guy glows like the sun.
Yeah, and so all this being a wide tangent to cover.
Yeah, I wanted to bring us back. I mean, we should probably wrap up soon. It's been a while, but I wanted to show something because this is supposed to be a 9/11 stream, and we were talking about I mentioned I don't understand why people are like defending this. It's like you said, what do they have to gain for it?
Right.
But still, people are out here on Twitter like, I mean, it's an indefensible position. The official narrative is completely ridiculous.
So the positive thing about that, though, is that their recruitment numbers have been suffering. So that's the good news. The good news is enough people are looking at this and saying, if I joined the military, I wouldn't be defending the Constitution. I wouldn't be defending my people. So that it's making a difference. You know what I mean?
Well, I think there is I think that's a significant faction in the military. I mean, there's a reason Douglas McGregor gets so much traction, right? Because there's a lot of people who are like, wait a minute, like, what are we fighting for out here? Right. Why do we care about Ukraine? Why do we care about Taiwan? So no, I'm not like anti-military. I just think.
Oh no, but what I'm saying is there is some reason to take some optimism here. Because for the military to function, it needs the support of the blue collar working class, and the blue collar working class is not on board with what's going on, not by and large. So you're getting a few people who that was just their dream of joining the military since they were a little kid, and they can't let it go. And then you got like a random psychopath here and there, right? But at scale, it's impacting them, and it's going to make it difficult for them to get done what they need to get done moving forward. For sure,
Well,
it's making it more expensive.
I think they want the psychos, but I think also the psychos are being siphoned off into these like private military corporations, like the one we just showed.
Those guys. Yeah, you don't really want those guys in the military too much because they let the media follow the military around, right? So you'd shuffle them off to, it used to be Blackwater back in the day. I think they're called like Triple Canopy now or something like that. You shuffle them off
Rebrand.
guys over there. Oh yeah, they rebranded. Now Blackwater is just it's a consultancy firm, but the actual business arm of it's called Triple Canopy, but it's the same company.
It's always black. Black rock, black stone, black water. They love that color, don't they?
Well,
Anyway.
black goo,
Black cube in Israel.
black cube, the black cube and the black goo. Those are two big rabbit holes. I'll tell you that right now.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of rabbit holes, we touched a bit on like esotericism, on like Atlantean, Age of Aquarius. So I would be remiss as the resident schizo on the barracks if I didn't bring this shit up. So this was posted. I mean, I've seen this before, but this was posted today, and this is everyone's seen that picture of the guy whispering in Bush's ear, right? It's like a meme. Everyone's seen that, but look at what happened in the minute preceding, and maybe you haven't seen this before.
Is the audio important for this video? Because we can't hear it.
Yeah,
You can't hear it? God damn it.
but I've seen this video before because there was a YouTuber who used to post this video and it used to integrate this footage into almost all of his videos. Of course, he got banned. He's nowhere to be found now, which is sad because I loved his videos, even though half of it was bullshit, it's flat Earth type shit. But still, like a lot of it was really interesting. But no, yeah. So it's basically all these kids saying this stuff in unison, and then they base this other really weird video that nobody knows where it really came from called I Pet Goat 2, kind of based on that, where it goes into all kinds of crazy conspiracy shit, crazy esoteric shit. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
I mean, I'm kind of into that. You really can't. Okay, well, what's happening is the kids, right before this guy comes in and tells Bush about 9/11, the teacher's having them chant "Kite hit, steel plane must."
Yeah,
and like, that's a big coincidence, isn't it? A lot of coincidences around 9/11.
Yeah,
and there is this angle of like, it was sort of a ritual. It was sort of like a ritual sacrifice to secure these people's power.
Well, yeah, Joachim and Boaz and all this, of course.
I mean, there was also that clip of Bush having that gaffe where he meant to talk about Ukraine, but he calls Ukraine Iraq. And then,
that was a Freudian slip. That was just a Freudian slip.
Right, yeah.
He's getting his decades confused.
I'm just like, oh, right, yeah, this is just what the men in Washington, like Colonel McGregor said, is like it's the men in Washington just securing their financializing the economy and gearing up for war in order to enrich themselves, bring us to nuclear annihilation.
It's funny that Woody Harrelson did this like sort of bit recently at some panel where he pretended to screw it up, and he was like, I can't believe that a powerful country would invade Iraq. I mean, Afghanistan. I mean, Syria. Like, that's what Bush did too, like, unironically. It's like beyond parody. Like, yeah, he said, we have to condemn this invasion of Iraq. I mean, Ukraine. And like,
assholes, man.
Yeah, he knows it. That's really the point I want to push home with this kite heel stip plane Mustang. Is like, they're flexing on you, bro. They know what they did. Everybody in their fucking circles knows what they did, and they're flexing on you. And
and they've been planning it out for generations. I mean, you look at it like, it's 9/11 pops up in pop culture over and over and over again for decades before it actually happens.
Oh yeah, we could get into the whole predictive programming.
I tell you what,
yeah,
these guys.
And so like, it's just, I have no patience, dude. I have no patience at all. Like, of all political topics, when the people are going to come out here and try and dunk on me and be all condescending, like, oh, you don't believe the official narrative? Like, you must be stupid. I can't stand it because, like, look at what these people are doing. They're dunking on you. They think you're stupid. Like, they actually think you're stupid. It's right out in the open, and they think because it's right out in the open and you're still pushing this narrative like a goddamn idiot, you deserve it. That's what they think. And you know what? When people are out here on Twitter defending this absurd official, I mean, it's absurd. People don't talk about what the official narrative actually is because it's fucking absurd and it's indefensible. But people who, I don't know what they have to gain. I mean, I want to say they're bots, but I feel like that's a cope. You know, I feel like it is people who just will embarrass themselves intellectually to defend this fucking narrative. It's like, how would I respond to a ruling class person who said, "Well, you know, they're stupid, they deserve it. They don't. It's right out in the like." How would I respond to that? And that's why it just pisses me off so much. Like, it's so blackpilling. This shouldn't be an argument. 22 years later, just look at the footage. Just look at the footage. Just look at Building 7. Look at the Pentagon. Look at this crazy fucking ritual they're doing in the classroom. They're flexing on you. They fucked it up and had to pull Building 7, right? And still people are defending it. It's like, how? I don't know, man.
Right? They have to, because they have to disclose what they're doing, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I'll tell you, like, I'm less pessimistic than you are, because I was extremely pessimistic for a long time. And actually, I started not being pessimistic actually when I met Adam Kokesh. That's a crazy story in and of itself. But that was a turning point for me when I met him in person by accident. I was a black pill before there was a black pill before that, and that's when things started to turn around for me. But even like years later, when I was in the libertarian movement, looking at all these, even my fellow libertarians was looking at it, was like, where's your balls, man? Like, you're saying all this stuff, but where's your balls? Like, what are you actually going to do about all this? Like, what can you, and to an extent I was saying it to myself too, is like, what can you do about it? Right? Because there's two sides of the coin, right? There's the left brain, the right brain, Descartes, Heidegger. There's the natural law or natural rights, and then there's the material reality. You have to have both. When you have both, that's empowering, because now it's like, okay, well, we can keep the natural rights in mind, but then we can still face reality as it is, right? And we don't have to be ideological. We can be pragmatic, and we can speak to people on their level, and we don't have to get buy-in on all these lofty sort of ideas. We can get buy-in on the needs of the here and now, and we can move forward, right? And so the worse things get, the more obvious it is that things are getting bad. And slowly, like, people wake up and then wake up and then wake up. And some people never wake up, but that's okay. And this is where the 3%ers get it right. It's like, you really don't need that many people who are awake to make a difference. You really don't. You need enough people who are pragmatic and at the same time smart enough to know right from wrong, and who can deal with people on their level. Get enough people like that, things change. So don't lose hope, man. Don't lose hope. I'm going to tell you, I'm highly optimistic.
Well, it is
about the conservative communist movement.
I think it is also part of like social media. Like I've been thinking about like NAFO, and like what is really the purpose?
Those people are lost. Okay, those
right,
people
like,
are lost souls.
Yeah, no, I mean it's an op. Those people are like shills getting paid. But what is the purpose of it, right? Like, what's the purpose of the psyop? Are they really trying to like convert people with their shitty memes and their weird ass Doge PFPs? Are they converting people to be pro-Ukraine? Really? I mean, they don't really congregate under pro-Ukraine stuff. They congregate under anti-Ukraine stuff.
Well, it's a cheap Wish.com knockoff of the whole meme culture that started in 2016. They're trying to recreate that. They're trying to use it. And it's just
right. But I think that the point of NAFO is not actually to like convert anyone. It's just to demoralize people like us, because when we post some pro-Russia shit, they flood in our mentions and just post like the dumbest, most ridiculous shit, and it gets like hundreds of likes, and it's demoralizing because it makes you think like, wow, it's me against the world. Like everybody in the fucking country has bought into all this ridiculous propaganda, and they're posting these horrible memes. And I think that's really the primary purpose. It's about taking people who see through the bullshit and just demoralizing them, ratioing them, brigading them, making them feel like they have no allies. But, social media is all controlled. Like, it's fake, really, right? Like, a lot of these NAFO people aren't even American. I mean, I think if you go out into your community and have the balls to actually like bring it up to people. I think the sentiment in the country is like, why do we have to care about Ukraine? I mean, there was no 9/11 for this. They just started telling us we had to care about Ukraine. The flags went up everywhere. The skyscrapers were lit up in blue and yellow, and we all have to care about Ukraine. And people didn't really buy it, and that's why NAFO exists, because they're creating this illusion that like there's a united front, and you're the outlier, you're the weird one, you're the crazy one. And I think so. I think you're right to a degree. Like, if you just spend all your time on social media, yeah, you will get blackpilled, because social media is mainstream media at the end of the day, and it's controlled, and all the algorithms are controlled, and all these like psyop troll groups like NAFO are controlled, and it's designed to maintain the status quo at the end of the day.
Right. Well, and unironically, like it's going to get to the point where you have to bear in mind that there could be bots out there. Chat
Over AI, yeah.
GPT. I mean, come on. Now, I think you can still kind of tell when it's Chat GPT, but it's going to get to the point where you won't be able to tell, really. So, I mean,
Yeah,
you're
also,
going to keep an eye out for that at some point.
Chat GPT is available for us, which means the deep state's got better shit. And also at the last Bilderberg conference, which was about 6 months ago, it was all about AI. And they brought in the OpenAI guy, and they brought in the guy from Google, and the whole conference was about AI. So that was 6 months ago. What do you think's happening now,
And in
What's
order
happening
to,
now is WorldCoin, right? But that's a whole other thing.
in order to start winding down the stream, I do want to close out with some words by Dmitry Medvedev, because you were talking about Ukraine. And I do agree with you, Milkman, that a lot of this stuff coming out is really just to demoralize us. And Dmitry Medvedev posted on Telegram a couple days ago just that sort of sentiment. He posted a few words in anticipation for today, which is wild that he doesn't have to do that, because he's Russian. He's not American. But he understands the
American people is not the American government.
Yeah, he understands the American people, and he understands how dire the situation is by these couple hundred people, these men in Washington. He posted, and this is a longer thing. It's like 3 paragraphs. But he said a few words in anticipation of 9/11. It seems that everyone is accustomed to the rudeness and disgusting narcissism of Western countries, and especially the USA, to their reckless belief in their own righteousness and their exclusivity, to their universal greyhound on any issue, peaceful or military. What can I say? Nothing new. Just remember Grandma Madeleine Albright, quote, "If we have to use force, it's because we are America. We are a responsible nation. We stand tall. We are looking to the future," unquote. But still, sometimes you catch yourself thinking, well, how can this be? Look, good people, after all, they don't live in another planet. Have they gone completely crazy? Unlawful sanctions against Russia and countries friendly to us, no problem, no justification needed. At the same time, do not touch Western assets in your backward economies. The West can supply any weapon to our enemies. Our friends are forbidden to do this, frightening them in every possible way with reprisals. Stealing citizens of different countries around the world to be brought to justice in your vaunted Hindustan is completely legal. You can't touch the Americans. They are sacred cows, even if they are seasoned spies, drug addicts shaking withdrawals, or pedophiles with saliva in the corners of their mouths. And so it is in everything. I don't want to be too harsh, but they expect that at some point, terrorists will again carry out an attack in the style of 9/11, but with an atomic or biological component. Or even worse, one of the leaders of nuclear countries will lose their nerve, and he will make an emotional decision to use weapons of mass destruction. Moreover, the nuclear club is constantly expanding, and a significant part of it is not bound by any obligations. And then that's it. All that remains is to raise money for a new monument in the ground zero area, best case scenario. And in the worst case, the wreaths will simply be lowered into the water. Yeah, I think he really nailed the head on the
How can you not? how can you not support Russia, dude? I mean, all the Ukrainians say is beg for money and bitch about how we haven't given them enough money. Like, they're not making any, like, they're not actually trying to reach out to American people. They're just
You know what's sad?
parasites.
What's sad is that speech, which is extremely poetic and deep, he read that to the American people, hoping that the American people would resonate with it. Because the Russian people are on a level, on average, to resonate with that document. The American people are not.
Yeah, it's so wild that Russian politicians are more stout leaders of the American people than American politicians.
Yeah.
True.
People love Putin more than they love Biden in this country. That's insane.
How could you not?
Yeah, Putin
How could you
spits.
not?
But yeah, I'm one of those people. I love Putin.
Putin spits, Biden drools.
Putin tapped the phones in my apartment when I lived in St. Petersburg. And my estimation of the man is infinitely higher than Biden's. I don't see how anyone could respect
Biden. Yeah, Biden's got all our phones tapped, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. How about
Yeah, you got, the YouTube algorithm might flag this video for saying that Putin's awesome. Very well, might get the
Well, I might flag it for the 9/11 stuff. I mean, they still censor about that 22 years later. That's how important of a like ideological shibboleth this is.
So, yeah, with with that in mind, yeah, we had talked about this yesterday. It's like saying that we really didn't want to make this red pill stream, and just talk more about getting people now that we're on as a nation on the same page. That yeah, like the narrative that the government wants to believe is is so tired at this point that it's much more fruitful to talk about where the real threat lies.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing that is frustrating, but also makes me optimistic.
Closing thoughts.
And that is this footage in Arizona. I know you didn't show it, but I mean, we all know what this footage is. And what frustrates me and gives me hope at the same time is that these people with their guns could just walk into that building and walk her out and say, it's not your government anymore. And it would happen like that. It would be that easy. And it wouldn't be treason because these people have committed treason. These people have committed treason. We take our government back as soon as we're ready to. It frustrates me that we're not ready to, but at the same time, it gives me hope that we still can.
Yeah, the closing statements for me is that increasingly like men and women like in Arizona who are peacefully protesting just for their basic constitutional rights are doing the right thing, and the police officers who stood in opposition to Governor Michelle Grisham, who was trying to suspend constitutional rights, are the reason that Democrats are trying to defund the police. It's because they are just as committed to defending constitutional rights and their families as everyone who was peacefully protesting at that rally. That's all it takes is the discipline to congregate and demand that you keep what has already been won, and that men and women have sacrificed their lives for. And today is as more is more solemn than most to remind us of that fact. You were gonna say something, Milkman? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give my final thoughts. About 9/11, the reason, one of the reasons, without getting into the esoteric stuff, one of the reasons people are so unwilling to accept what is the obvious truth in front of them, like, yeah, the government orchestrated 9/11. It's clear if you look into it at all. Because if you accept that, our ruling class is so depraved, so evil, as Dennis Prager would say, for so long, and they're still riding this high of this just horrible, like, ritual sacrifice they did 20 years ago and still using it against the American people. What this was a declaration of war. Like you mentioned treason. Our government declared war on us in 2001, and it's still happening, and it's been a very one-sided war so far.
Yeah.
And if you wake up to this fact, I mean, well, it's a lot easier to just watch Netflix and play video games and watch pornography and smoke weed. It's, you know, reasonably comfortable. That's the be happy part of the own nothing and be happy. Whereas if you're going to accept this reality in front of you, if you're going to accept what you see in the footage from 9/11, you have to accept that you are at war, whether you want to be or not, whether you like it or not. The American people have been at war since 2001. It's quiet weapons for silent wars, right? And that's, yeah, you got that one. And that's where we're at. And it's a very cold, hard truth to wake up to. But you have to, because it's the reality. The government has declared war on us. They're still at war with us. They're throwing people in jail today. They're criminalizing speech. They're criminalizing opposition. I mean, look at what's happening to Trump. Trump's getting thrown in jail. This is what we make fun of banana republics for doing. It's happening here. Why? Because we've been at war. And the longer people are asleep to this fact, the more we lose, the more L's we take, because, you know, wars don't end when you're asleep. Wars end when you wake up and win. And that's what we as the American people need to do.
Strong words. Can't wait to get you on camera, Milkman. With the outfits coming together. I ordered my uniform as well from Temu. So
I'm working on it. I got the corkboard today, so that's something.
yeah, we thank everyone who's been tuning into the stream for this long. We recently doubled our YouTube subscriber count over the weekend, so we're glad that we could give PJ the audience he deserves. Let's make sure to keep sharing this video, whether you're on X.com, whether you're on YouTube, so that we can continue being the think tank arm of the people's deep state. PJ, you're welcome back onto the stream anytime. And that goes for other infrared guerrillas, other members of the Red Army, which is the strongest. Yeah. In the meantime, you can follow the Barracks on X, on Twitter X, at the Barracks Live, or if you're watching from X, you can follow us on YouTube at the Barracks News. We appreciate y'all. We appreciate you, PJ. We will be taking a break for a few days, coming back probably around Thursday with some more hard-hitting conversations. But in the meantime, that's all we got, folks. We're out.